Sounds good, guys. Hi, Kate.
Hello.
Looking forward
Hello.
to it.
YouTube, we're on live now.
Do you want people to ask questions as you're presenting or after?
After.
Okay.
Yes, it's running. So Peter Foreman is there.
Can he hear us?
Mhm.
Hi, Peter.
We just can't see.
Yeah, you can't talk back.
Okay, now Amy is a co-host. I'll just make Andrea co-host as well. All righty.
I hope people are getting in. Okay.
Oh, great. Glad to hear that, Peter, Marilyn.
So we'll probably give people around, what, 5 minutes to come in and see.
Yeah, it's a good idea. People are usually late. Sometimes if you start a little bit early, you can get them in a little bit earlier because some people will be waiting.
Fire report for New Mexico is not good. Responding to the chat there. Yeah, better than it has been, at least in my particular area.
Mm.
And the winds.
I heard it's been going on, one fire has been going on for 2 months straight.
I thought it's April 6th. I don't know. I can't remember the date specifically, but it's been a really long time. Yeah, the one to the east. It's
I
massive.
actually heard that on the radio and I was like, wow, that's insane. And it was weird. I was driving back from El Paso to Albuquerque and you could just see the difference in the sky. Like it got so much darker, like and grayer because of the smoke.
Yes.
Mm. Yeah, this new way that we figured out the Zoom leak should send people straight here without having to register through Zoom like it did before. So people shouldn't have too much hassle, but you never know. Just keeping an eye on my emails in case people are emailing that they're having issues. Oh, now we got two. Okay, people are starting to roll in now. I say around 6:05, we officially start. David? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to email people who should be here.
Okay. Okay. Mm. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we got 4.
Um, so I just heard that someone can't get in.
Oh.
They said they're not being let in.
Hmm.
So they're sitting there waiting, and for some reason.
Thing is, we don't have like permissions, like letting people in. They just come in. But yeah, do you want me to send you the link?
Put the link in the chat.
Okay. Well, if they're in the chat, they can get in.
Yeah.
I'll send you the link anyway.
Okay.
Can you put it in chat?
The chat that we're on right now?
Yeah. Just the hosts and panelists. So I can put it, I'm here at the Eventbrite trying to make a new email.
Okay.
Hello, Gary Lee Nelson.
Okay, got it.
What did you get it? In here?
Okay.
Oh.
There's the link.
Okay, thanks for the link. I will email that out.
Copy.
Okay.
No. Okay, we're at 9. All right.
Should we begin or do you want to wait for a couple more people?
It's up to you guys.
Let's start.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and start. I'm gonna close this. Okay. All right, so welcome everybody that has joined us today. We have here with the artist from the exhibition called In Place. This is Kate Boles. And then I am one of the co-curators of this exhibition. My name is Bianca Camarillo. I'm also a master's in museum studies student right now. Following our other co-curator, David Sneed. You wanna introduce yourself, David?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is David Sank, and I'm the exhibition specialist for SciArt Santa Fe and STEAM New Mexico at the College of Fine Arts at University of New Mexico. I'm also a master's student in historic preservation and architecture, and with a focus in historic preservation and regionalism. And we're going to talk, first I'm going to introduce the exhibition we're doing now. We're open with limited hours at the Santa Fe Art Institute tomorrow from 1 to 6. And it's called In Place, Future Artifacts and Remembrance on El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro. The show encourages dialogue on the relationships of art and science to monuments and other historical artifacts and representation through the lens of land use, colonization, climate change, extractive industries, and community. One of our sponsors is SciArt Santa Fe. That's our organization. And we're a 501c3 nonprofit that serves community members interested in art science, highlights the long history and rich presence of art science with Santa Fe, and helps to further Santa Fe's role as an international hub for art science. The mission of STEAM New Mexico is to raise capacity for STEAM education through the state of New Mexico, providing opportunities for students and community members with a focus on higher education. STEAM is an approach to learning that uses science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics to guide student inquiry, dialogue, and critical thinking. This presentation is made possible with the generous support of the Department of Cultural Affairs, New Mexico Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Any views, findings, or conclusions or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of our funders. Our presenting sponsor is the Santa Fe Art Institute, which is where we have our exhibition, and Kate's work is there as well. Leonardo, this is Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous. Laser Talks are a program of international gatherings held by over 50 organizations worldwide that bring artists, scientists, humanists, and technologists together for informal presentations, performances, and conversations with the wider public. We are now streaming on YouTube, and you can tell your friends after this that this is being recorded and being live streamed. And you can subscribe to us. Also, if you like this program and want to see this more, we are asking for donations, and you can do that through Patreon and join as a member. And last, but of course not least, is Kate. Kate Boles is a New Mexico licensed landscape architect and lecturer at UNM. Prior to teaching, she worked in Santa Fe design firm for 6.5 years and assisted the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum with a cultural landscape study for the Abiquiu property as the 2019-2020 Georgia O'Keeffe Cultural Landscape Fellow. She holds a Master's of Architecture from UNM, a Master's of Landscape Architecture and Certificate in Historic Preservation from the University of Virginia, and a BA in Biochemistry and Cell Biology, and a BS in Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from Rice University. Did I get that all right, Kate?
Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure. So without further ado, Kate Boles.
Great. Wonderful. All right, let me close my chat and share my screen, and we'll get going. Okay. It's a little slow to pop up here, but hopefully, David, you can see the slide just fine? Yep, I see Bianca nodding. Great. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much, Bianca and David, for co-creating this show, and I'm excited to present today. So this is a guest room multi-species condenser, and it's based on work I did as my UNM Master's Architectural project in 2021. And I've revised it and added new work and reframed it for this particular exhibit. So this idea that is central to the in-place show of artifacts of remembrance, visual representations to future monuments, is really thought-provoking and I think relevant to today's important questions of diversity and inclusion. So, what is an artifact of remembrance? What is a future monument, and who or what might it be for? So the first couple slides are definitions, because I think words are important. I'll try to get into it a little bit, but basically, if we look at the Merriam-Webster definitions of artifact, I felt like two general sort of themes arose. One, an object remaining from a particular period. That's kind of feeling more typically what we think of. And then the second one, though, I thought was really interesting as a defect in an image, such as like a digital photograph that appears as a result of a technology or method or used to create something. So it's actually a result of a process. And then doing the same for, it says participants can now see your screen. So hopefully they could see it before. All right, I'm not going back. Okay, so doing the same for remembrance yields a state of bearing in mind, an act of recalling to memory, and something that serves to keep or bring to mind, like remember, commemoration, or memorial. Okay, and I have a chat. I don't know if that's directly to me. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so an artifact of remembrance can be thought of as an object or this defect of an image of results of a process that serves to keep or bear in mind, and a monument as a lasting evidence or reminder, an example of someone or something notable or great, or a boundary or position marker, is one example of an artifact of remembrance. This understanding of artifact as a defect in an image, I think, really opens up an engagement with artifact as a result of process, and in addition to a physical object. And I think it's helpful to our task of rethinking what a monument or an artifact of remembrance can be. So why rethink what a monument can be? Recent events such as, and we think we heard from Heidi in the last talk especially, right? Such as the 2020 pulling down the Santa Fe Plaza obelisk, have highlighted how current objects designated as monuments fail to adequately represent the communities that surround them. So new forms of monuments or other artifacts of remembrance may better reflect our shifting values. And how can the idea of monuments be rethought to be more diverse and inclusive? So in the in-place exhibit, we've seen Heidi's work about Santa Fe's lack of monument diversity, and the work from Katya and Sue's studio at UNM that was focusing on rethinking what memorials, a particular type of monument, might be. We've also seen Chico's robot that literally, physically crosses the US-Mexico border, and in doing so brings awareness to the non-physical exclusions that exist. and the work from Francisco and Kathy's studio at UNM as well that prompted diversity and inclusivity by designing across borders, from the design prompt itself of a new US-Mexico border crossing to the collaboration between students from Mexico, New Mexico, and Arizona, to the disciplinary border mixing between architecture and landscape architecture and historic preservation. So it was breaking a lot of borders, which was pretty cool. An Angel's parallel universe in which the West was never colonized, I think brings attention to underserved communities and questions whose stories are being monumentalized. And my work fits into this conversation as it also examines the concept of border in order to expand thinking about inclusion and exclusion. And like Angel's work, mine also questions whose stories are told. So today, I will reflect on and reframe my UNM architectural master's project from 2021 as a monument to non-humans in addition to humans. First, I will address questions of inclusivity through my examination of borders. Second, I will address questions of diversity by expanding the idea of who monuments are for to non-humans and what monuments are to a systemic functioning infrastructure. But first, some backstory and some pretty ponies. Okay, so I grew up in the countryside of upstate New York, very connected to the more than human world. My brother and I spent hours outside playing in this huge weeping willow tree, a forsythia, the woods and the creek behind the house. My mom taught us the names of the birds and the plants, but more importantly, she taught us to pay attention, to respect, and to marvel at the world around us. My cats, Jim and Shadow, and Lucky, excuse me, and the horses I rode, such as Dancer on the right here, and Windsor on the left, but also Brown Sugar, Gypsy, and Jimmy, and our dog Harvey, as well as all the other animals I met. You know, they all taught me about interspecies communication from a very young age. And just looking at these two photos, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like there's a definite personality difference between these two that is being showcased in this photo, and I can tell you from experience that it's accurate. So these experiences built up, and they reinforced my innate empathy for non-human species. So fast forward to my penultimate year of graduate architecture school. I knew I wanted to do a master's project, but how to select a project topic to be the seed from which a future research agenda could grow. So after some deep soul searching, I found design issues related to the world biodiversity crisis at the intersection of my background in ecology, landscape architecture, and architecture, and my interest in supporting non-human species. So while I was writing the initial project proposal, I was reading Aldo Leopold's 1949 book, A Sand County Almanac, and Carl von Frisch's 1974 book, Animal Architecture. And Leopold was a naturalist and environmentalist who, through keen observation and very poetic writing, advocated for a new land ethic based on the connections between humans and the environment. And incidentally, Leopold was instrumental in setting aside for conservation the land we now know as the Gila Wilderness right here in New Mexico. So von Frisch won the 1973 Nobel Prize for his contributions to the field of animal behavior. And his book, Animal Architecture, is a thorough documentation and analysis of how selected non-humans build, and he provides examples that range from insects to fish to frogs to birds and mammals, of course. So all of these different architects and the structures that they build. So Leopold and von Frisch's work led me to Ned Doddington's nonprofit, The Expanded Environment, which was formerly called Animal Architecture, which in his own words is, quote, an organization devoted to demonstrating alternate ways of responsibly and synthetically integrating biological and ecological agents into the built world to understand, appreciate, and envision a more productive relationship between architectural and biological systems, end quote. And Doddington's 2013 TED Talk helped me connect Leopold's ethic and von Frisch's studies and consider how design could help narrow the perceived gap between humans and non-humans. And here, as you see on the screen, this quote says, animal architecture, and that's the blog that he's referring to, that's now called Expanded Environment, is a project about bridging the humanist divide between us and them. It's about getting us out of thinking that we are not animals when in fact we are definitely animals. It is also a project about interrupting the historical pattern of human subjugation, where we are relegating all these other animals and species to the class of second-class beings. So these ideas reminded me of, or I guess I should say on this one, reminded me of American environmental historian William Cronin's essay, The Trouble with Wilderness, or Getting Back to the Wrong Nature, which I read during graduate school at UVA. And the essay discusses the problematic binary of man and nature and the need for an ethic of how to live together. And he writes that, quote, "We reproduce the dualism that sets humanity and nature at opposite poles. So we thereby leave ourselves little hope of discovering what an ethical, sustainable, honorable human place in nature might actually look like," end quote. And he calls for, quote, "an environmental ethic that will tell us as much about using nature as about not using it," end quote. So the initial research phase of my master's project started in fall 2020 and was heavily influenced by an architectural theory class taught by Norel Wendell, who was actually also a member of my master's project committee that I took that same semester. And my theory paper, Dwelling as Ecological Process, explored ontology for multi-species dwelling in the Anthropocene. Key references included works by Martin Heidegger, Donna Haraway, and The Non-Human Turn, which was edited by Richard Gruson. So I am by no means a Heideggerian scholar or a Haraway scholar, any of that, but I really enjoyed the questions that Heidegger's building dwelling thinking text brought to mind. And in this paper, I focused on his ideas that, quote, "dwelling is the manner in which mortals are on Earth," end quote. And it made me think about how all mortals, meaning all species, dwell like on this planet together. So Donna Haraway, if you're not familiar with her, is one of the founders of the post-humanities, a movement broadly focused on decentering the human, rejecting human exceptionalism, and accepting ourselves as human animals. So among her many books, her Companion Species Manifesto was influential to my work and is, quote, "a story of cohabitation, coevolution, and embodied cross-species sociality," end quote. So the Non-Human Turn, the book on the right here, differs from posthumanism as it, quote, "insists," to paraphrase Latour, that's Bruno Latour, "that we have never been human, but that the human has always co-evolved, coexisted, and collaborated with the non-human, and that the human is characterized precisely by this indistinction from the non-human," end quote. So these are all different things that I was kind of exposed to and thinking about and have really kind of influenced my trajectory. And then I'm still exploring and still trying to understand, for sure. Another point of reference for me was a 2019 article called New Materialism and Ontology for the Anthropocene by Melinda H. Benson, who's a law professor at UNM, in which she wrote, quote, and this is the one that's on the screen right now, "The Anthropocene is not simply a new geologic epoch, it is a conceptual opportunity. In it, we can reconfigure our orientation to the material world, many of our currently limiting beliefs about humans and our place in the world. These beliefs include the idea that humans are somehow separate from nature and somehow exceptional in terms of our capacity to act. And these beliefs are the core conditions that created the Anthropocene. Combined, they result in an approach to environmental governance that tends to focus on human needs rather than system function. Only by addressing the ontological assumption of human exceptionalism will governance in the Anthropocene meaningfully address the challenges to come," end quote. So hopefully you can kind of see a theme going on here about decentering humans and thinking about togetherness and how we all coexist and work together. So during this time, I was also reading The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert, which maybe many of you have read. It was a Pulitzer Prize winning book, which really poignantly situates through well-researched stories about frogs and bats and great auk and many more other species, our current biodiversity crisis within the context of the past Big Five mass extinctions. And the quote on the screen is one of the ones that really stuck with me. I just can't shake that particular story about the huge die-offs in bats. Ugh, and I have these like visuals associated with that quote. So it's troubling. So I was also reading The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abram. And this book, you know, these stories about language and the sensory embodied experience of the many-voiced landscape, you know, I really enjoyed those. And I was rereading Petrochemical America by Kate Orff, which is a book that tells of the damage the petrochemical industry inflicted on the Mississippi Delta and its multi-species communities. But it tells the story mainly through images, through photographs, and through graphics, like architectural design, landscape architectural graphics, like plans and sections and diagrams and composite images and hybrid images, with minimal text, really. And so that has really been a touchstone for me during my master's project, both for the graphics and for the storytelling and the theme and their work. They're a great firm. So I was struck by the power of storytelling in all of these, you know, to share knowledge and generate empathy in a manner that sticks with the reader. And I wanted to incorporate this method of writing into my theory paper, because that was what I was working on at the time, but in the long scheme of things, just in general, as I continue to move forward. And so thus throughout the paper, I inserted these illustrated short story interludes, as I called them, as another form of communicating the need for an ontology of multi-species dwelling. So two of these interludes are shown here. So on the left, basic needs. During high school, I volunteered at the local zoo. Some of the animals seemed fine, and others adopted strange behaviors because of their life in captivity. However, it is my memories of the fennec fox in the traveling show that haunt me. I entered the dark trailer that housed the traveling show exhibits to feed the animals and clean their cages. I flicked on the lights. The fennec fox went wild. He threw himself at the bars in his small carrier cage, yipping uncontrollably. It was really obvious he wanted me to pet him, so against due policy, I did. I scratched him awkwardly through the bars. He pressed his faint fur into my fingers and looked lovingly into my eyes. He didn't even care about the food I put in his cage. He just wanted me to stay with him. And it was so painful to leave that trailer, to leave him in his tiny cage, isolated from all other animals in the dark. What kind of animals are we? Homo sapiens. And that's a little fennec fox on the left. They're super cute. But it'd be an equally powerful story, even if it wasn't a super cute animal, of course. It's just they need a lot of the same things we need. Community, sociality, all that kind of stuff. So the one on the right, adaptive foraging. In the dark quiet of a winter night in a small rural town in Canada, my aunt awoke to strange sounds and a cool breeze coming from the main room of her house. She sleepily stumbled down the stairs and saw the front door open. She figured it had blown open during the night and moved to shut it. Upon turning around, she quickly realized her assumption was incorrect. There, standing in her kitchen with his head in the freezer, feasting on frozen meat, was a fully grown male black bear. She reopened the front door and went back to bed. So it was through a combination of this theory class that I've been talking about and my master's project research, which was going on simultaneously, that I started thinking about borders and also developed my essential research question, how much of us is us? So these two themes carried through the completion of my project and are the foundation for this talk today. So first, I will address questions of inclusivity through my examination of borders. And second, I will address questions of diversity by expanding the idea of who monuments are for to non-humans and what they are to systemic functioning infrastructure, like I said at the beginning of the talk. So first, Borders and inclusivity. So human and non-human cohabitation questions the notion of boundary. In Building Dwelling Thinking, Heidegger wrote, a boundary is, quote, that from which something begins its presencing, end quote. And this description creates flexible boundaries that change relative to perception. So take, for example, a fire. Where is the boundary of a fire? Is it the perimeter of the fuel for the fire, like the logs that you put underneath? The edge of the fire pit, if one was made? Or perhaps a location where you can no longer feel the fire's warmth? Or the location where you can no longer see the fire? How else might we sense a fire's presence? You know, smoke, smell, crackling noise. And how might that be different from other humans and non-humans? So boundaries become shifting relationships of situated knowledge, understood from an individual's partial perspective of the world. Those are a lot of the terms that Donna Haraway would use, but it basically means that we don't have universal, standard, singular views of the world. Everyone comes from their own particular location, you know, their own particular self, their own knowledge, who you are, you bring that with you to everything you see and understand. And you could never see everything at once. So what is a wall to a human? To you that lives on one side of the wall, to me on the outside, to a mouse who lives inside the wall, to an ant who travels through the wall. It's another kind of example of this. Early in my research, I learned that the Chihuahuan Desert ecoregion is one of the most biodiverse arid regions in the world, but is facing numerous threats, including land use changes such as overgrazing, increased water use, and urbanization that damage or destroy habitat. It seemed an appropriate place to cite my design project focused on improving and supporting biodiversity. And I set out to learn about the region. So one of the first things I tried to ascertain was, where is this ecoregion and what are its boundaries? But what I thought would be a really simple sort of fact proved to be an interesting and complex question. So what you're seeing here is yellow is current as of 2012, where the Chihuahuan Desert was, which is based on very complex biome sampling method published in this article on the bottom left. And then the darker black would be where the Chihuahuan Desert is likely to be, most likely to be in 2060. And the gray, it might still be there, but it's less likely. And if it's just a plain yellows, it's been lost. So it's basically, you might be able to tell it's shifting sort of north and up. You can't tell the elevation here, but it's pretty complex. So the region is not a static entity, but is constantly shifting in response to various factors. And to more richly describe the boundaries of this ecoregion and who the boundaries might affect, I mapped them through the lens of 5 themes. So species migration, species loss, species type, species coevolution, and species displacement. And these following images are just draft versions, not final versions of 2 of these maps. So this one is about migration. Around 9,000 years ago, the area that is now the Chihuahuan Desert ecoregion was a pinon juniper woodland. Now it's dominated by grassland and desert scrub. Perhaps in recognition of the fact that the vegetation communities shift over time, one method used to define the boundary of the Chihuahuan Desert ecoregion is to connect it to the range of a key species. Then when the species range shifts, so does the ecoregion. The agave lechuguilla, a type of agave seen on the right here, is the primary diagnostic species of the Chihuahuan Desert. And the Chihuahuan Desert ecoregion boundary is actually defined, or can be defined, one of the ways of defining it is by using the current range of the agave lechuguilla. And I think this really brings up interesting questions of migration and border and relativity, what humans and non-humans move across these borders, How do they interact with the lechuguilla? Do they participate in altering the range of the lechuguilla? And then digging deeper into the understanding of agave lechuguilla specifically as the primary diagnostic species of the Chihuahuan Desert, some more questions arise. What are the boundaries between agave lechuguilla and other agaves? When did lechuguilla evolve as a species? How is the species and its relationship with others, such as its pollinators, changing and might affect its range, and then of course the range of the boundaries of the Chihuahuan Desert ecoregion itself. Here we're seeing haplotypes in the colored circles, which are like basically showing genetic variation, and you can kind of think of it as the reds are more similar, and then the blues are similar, and the greens are sort of similar, and that kind of stuff. So it's trying to show that within the designated species of agave lechuguilla, there is enough sort of variation and clustering or similarities that you see this regional difference. So it's kind of like, where is that cutoff? Where do you say, and I mean, there's a scientific definition for it, but I just think it's really interesting. All right. So as I started to design, I continued to engage multiple and shifting ideas of boundary. And too often in design, especially in professional practice, we conflate political parcel with the design site. And even though it's often helpful to think well beyond the parcel while designing. And for this project, I took the design site to be an entire ecosystem, such as on the top here, the grasslands of Llanos in northern Mexico, and the aquatic ecosystem on the bottom of Cuatro Ciénegas. So shifting or even uncertain boundaries related to the ecosystem are then built into a fundamental understanding of the project, allowing it a temporal and sort of conditional flexing. And the boundary of the building itself, the exterior wall, became my primary area of design investigation for this project. And the exterior wall typically is a dividing line between indoor and outdoor architecture and landscape, and with the exception of pets, human and non-human species. The wall performs several functions to maintain such separations, including physical control, wind control, light control, water control, and temperature control. So one winter night, I was trying to sleep, but I was distracted by the sound of mice scurrying around in the house walls, and it got me thinking about the functionality of walls as boundaries for non-human species. So what if instead of compressing all one wall functions into a thin boundary, we expand the functions to create multiple occupiable interstitial wall spaces? And then the wall becomes a device to support inclusion instead of exclusion. And here's a conceptual section diagram that guided my design for this project. Within the expanded wall are different occupiable microclimates. Within the insulation layer, the red one in both diagrams here, the mouse and the expanded wall. The insulation layer is a thermally controlled space, and then between the insulation layer and the waterproof layer is a space shielded from precipitation, and then the sun protection layer provides shade. Okay. So moving into the grasslands design. This is a design specifically for the grasslands of Llanos within the Chihuahuan Desert ecoregion. This diagram illustrates how the concept of the expanded wall applies to a design for a project in the grasslands of Llanos. Here, I guess I can show you with my mouse. This red is the thermal layer, the blue is the water layer, and the yellow is this shade layer. The wind protection layer consists of multiple segments, and that was kind of unique to this particular design. And next, we'll take a closer look at how these expanded borders promote inclusivity. So the wind protection layer. So these in the back here, all these little blocky things are adobe seed bank windscreen walls. The adobe blocks are made from the various local soils right there in the region. And for tensile strength, local grass stalks with the seed head still on them would be included in the adobe mix instead of straw. to turn the wall into a seed bank. The walls are located around the structure to screen winter winds and encourage moisture deposition. As the wind and water scour the walls, they erode, and in the process, plant the grass seeds from the adobe blocks. The plants grow and go to seed, starting the next generation of grassland plants, while also providing forage for grassland species, including migratory birds and the keystone species prairie dogs. At the time of adobe seed bank wall construction, a shrub hedge lining the wall is also planted. So as the wall erodes, the shrubs grow, and the hedge replaces the adobe wall eventually as a windscreen. The new screens radiate out from the building in time, products of ongoing maintenance that would be continually constructed as needed. The wind protection layer is a barrier to selected wind conditions, of course, but it's more than that. The barrier is actually an occupiable space of multi-species support. In addition to their role as seed banks, the walls also have integrated benches for seeding, holes between the bricks to provide shelter and perches for birds as they feast on seeds in the walls, and to also allow wind and water access to the walls to speed up the erosion of the walls themselves. And after the walls erode, the erosion spoils of loose bare soil provide good locations for the prairie dog burrows. So moving on to the sun protection layer, the main component of the sun protection layer is a wood shade structure. At times it's covered in cholla pieces and cholla bird nest bundles, like on the west side. You can see that this is the west side at the top of the screen. The south side would be left, the north side would be right. And sometimes the trellis members are kind of edited in density for increased or decreased light transmittance, or on the roof over here, used to shade waffle garden soil pockets. Daylighting is provided through south glazing and small skylight perforations. Here are these skylight perforations in the water protection layer. The cholla bird nest bundles are made from repurposed skeletons of cholla cactus, which is an indicator species of grassland degradations. You're actually recycling or reusing or repurposing something that is showing the damage and turning it into something helpful about regrowth of these grasslands. The bundles of various sizes provide nesting locations for non-migratory grassland birds directly within the sun protection layer. The wood shade structure is supported by inclined wood columns. These are these big sticks sort of sticking up here. You can see a hawk on the top here. And they extend past the trellis like telephone poles. They're really tall posts that provide perches for predatory birds. So the design supports hunting by predator birds, but it also provides protected spaces for birds' potential prey that they can use to hide. So it's not negating either, but allowing both to kind of happen. In this way, the design does not preference one species over another, but considers the interrelated relationships of the grassland as a functioning ecosystem. So part of the building, as I pointed out, is a green roof, which is extending the grassland to the surface of the building itself and blurring the lines between architecture and landscape. To address one of the practical problems of heat gain and moisture loss with green roofs in hot, arid climates, attributed wood shade structure performs like Native American waffle gardens, creating shaded soil pockets on the roof. The sun protection layer is a sunlight control device. Of course, it blocks light, but it also admits or filters light for different purposes. In the winter, south light streams into the building and provides passive heating. And this thermal mass down here would come in these windows and hit the floor and heat it up. And the south-facing greenhouses right here support year-round vegetable beds for the human occupants. Small skylights filter the sunlight to create gentle conditions for a plant nursery and climate extension garden comprised of more climatically sensitive plant species in here. And the shade structure over a water collection basin, so right over this shade structure here, is densely covered with cholla pieces to minimize evaporation. So the water protection layer for this design is comprised of structural 1 foot diameter, half round, high tensile concrete arches. You can see a detail of that over here. And they're sloped to drain rainwater into an underground cistern. So they're sloped this way, the water would hit and flow this way, flow down, and go into this water catchment basin and then into this underground cistern. So water collects in a deep V between the arches right here. There's soil on top of that. And in doing so, it waters the roof plants as it like flows off the roof. When it actually rains, of course. So perforations in the east facade here allow water to drip through into this climate extension garden and into the water collection basin. Any overflow is drained by the concrete half round culverts right here to irrigate the newly generated grasslands at the adobe seed bank walls. So an interesting side note about this project is that the presence of humans actually helps create the conditions to generate grasslands. Municipal water is piped into the building for human use, and then treated gray and black water provides continuous irrigation for grasslands that would otherwise rely on dwindling precipitation. The water protection layer covers the climate extension garden right here, creating a semi-conditioned building space as a climate shelter for sensitive species and extending the range of species the refugia support. Here, plants grow from soil pockets within the dry stacked stone retaining wall and in a shady, slightly humid space under this expanded metal mesh walkway next to the water collection basin. Another aspect of the water protection layer in this arid climate is to safeguard precious water stores or resources. The narrow and shaded water collection basin exposes a minimal amount of water surface area to prevent potential evaporation. The majority of collected water is stored underground in a cistern. However, both of these features also provide habitat for non-human species. So it's important to leave some of the water exposed because it's to allow it to be useful to these other species. A series of undulating shallow steps right here provide safe drinking water access for some of the smaller species like skinks, mice, and birds. The cistern has large underwater holes. You can kind of see some right here in one side for diving species to enter the cistern. It is less a cistern in a traditional sense and more of like an underground pond full of life. The water protection layer facilitates recycling and reuse of water, a basic and universal required resource for survival in the desert. So the thermal protection layer of this particular one, an airspace functions as the building insulation layer. On the south, again, south is over here, east and then west is up here. The airspace is located between these two windows. On the north side, it's an occupiable space that's semi-conditioned by air exiting from the kitchen space or air flowing across the water collection basin. And this semi-conditioned space itself functions as a thermal buffer for the kitchen space. An airspace above the ceiling is used to vent hot air in the summer and retain it in the winter using an HRV. So air enters the building through earth tubes here, which precondition the air. Hot air is then exhausted via solar chimney. This is all standard sort of passive design techniques. The floor level is recessed in the earth to harness thermal energy buffering and to retain heat in the winter and cool the space along with the natural air stratification in the summer. Electronically controlled dampers control the airflow between spaces. And the building can also be fully open to take advantage of natural ventilation when conditions are favorable. So you can open all of these right here. When open, these two layers of operable windows on the south facade, the glass louvers adjacent to the ramp here, and the operable covers on the perforations in the water protection layer in the north allow air to flow sort of straight through the building. And air flowing across the surface of the water catchment basin provides some additional evaporative cooling. So now moving on to another design. This one's for an aquatic area in the Cuatro Ciénegas Basin. And again, we see here how the concept of the expanded wall applies to this particular project. And again, the thermal layer, the water layer, and then the shade layer, how they're deployed here. And we'll again, take a closer look at how these borders promote inclusivity. So the sun protection layer, starting here, this one harvests solar energy to run a passive solar still on the roof. The shade structures, both overhead, like here, and underfoot over here, extend over the water to reduce evaporative loss. And they're sometimes multi-legged. You can kind of get a glimpse of it there and here. Supports extend into the water and blend with the lily pad stalks to provide protective cover for fish. The building itself is conceived of as a shade structure for this deep water pool right here. Among other things, this structure creates a sheltered condition where catfish like to lurk during the day and hunt at night, for one specific sort of example. A vertical rebar grass stalk-like shade screen on the west side here shades the building from low sun angle west and east light. Dead grass, replenished seasonally as an act of building maintenance, is woven across the rebar stalks, providing additional shading as well as nest and cover material. Over time, the grass is taken away by birds as nesting material, or it builds up on the ground as duff cover. And the duff acts as a moisture retaining mulch and small creature shelter before being incorporated as fertilizer into the soil. For lighting, diffuse daylight enters the building from these thermal water storage tubes on the south wall, and there's also some more tubes right under the skylight in the center. But the main part of this design is the water protection layer, which is appropriate for an aquatic design. The water protection layer is fully integrated with the water systems of the site. So river water flows into, the river's on the right here, and the river water flows into this marsh area, which is right here, through these dry stack rock seeps. And then it flows into this deeper pool via an elevated acequia, which is underneath this walkway. There's an acequia right there. And during flash floods, the banks overflow and the project acts as a large detention basin. Overflow from the poza, which is this, again, that's the word for this deep pool, spills across this weir in the concrete retaining wall and evaporates in the playa habitat, which has no water outlet. It's part of the habitat. And water from the poza here is actually sucked up these steel tube, I'm calling them straws, which are powered by wind turbines on the roof. And these straws deliver the water to the rooftop solar still. The solar still is comprised of two layers. The upper clear arched solar still covers and the lower structural, again, 1 foot diameter, half round, high tensile concrete arches. The upper arches are sloped to drain the rainwater north off the roof and into the pool. So any rainwater would be replenishing the pool, the poza. The lower arches of that structure are sloped south, so they're sloped to drain the condensate in the opposite direction, south, into the south facade solar thermal water storage tubes before feeding aquifer injection wells, that's what these blue arrows represent down here, that are housed in the building structural walls and pilings. So the building is essentially a machine to support the underground habitat of aquifer microorganisms, but it also supports numerous other aquatic habitats in the process. The compacted clay lining beneath the marsh and the pool is graded to create a gradient of water depths and indentations for egg laying and a variety of aquatic hangout spaces. The smooth transition between the marsh and the poza provides easy access to the water for many species. The South Posa retaining wall over here is covered with highly textured pH neutral echinocrete panels, which is a really cool product. And that can be colonized by aquatic vegetation to provide refuge and forage for small fish. So the thermal protection layer here. So Bianca, I saw you came back on, and I know it's almost 7 here. Are you trying to give me a hint? No, we're good? Okay, okay. All right, so the thermal protection layer here. In this project, the water systems double as the thermal layer. The south-facing thermal water storage tubes provide passive conditioning. And on the east and the west ends, there's walls of gray and black water treatment tanks that act as a thermal buffer layer. And below the building, the water body, because of its high specific heat, buffers temperature change and provides evaporative cooling for air entering through these building floor vents. Okay. So the second part is shorter, and it's less like, this is more just thoughts that I've come up with for this particular lecture, less like research questions I had previously. So again, to remind you guys, I'm going to be addressing these questions of diversity by expanding the idea of who monuments are for and what they are, basically. So I'd like to pause for a moment and return to my backstory. And this is a draft image here. This is not a final image as well. But to explain how I began thinking about these sort of diverse and more than human world in my research. Again, Nora's theory class combined with my project research provide an important laboratory for testing and developing my ideas. And I'd like to pair this draft image with an excerpt from my initial foray into the question of how much of us is us in my theory paper. So how much of us is us? It's kind of looking at the border of self, of physical, your physical body that we take for granted as a border, but is it? So we are already cohabitating and have been for a long time. Between 20,000 and 40,000 years ago, humans domesticated dogs, dogs split genetically from wolves, and our two species entered into a coevolutionary relationship. From that time until now, dogs have become our pets, friends, helpers, hunters, weapons, food, material resource, and saviors. Dogs are an obvious and likable example of co-evolution and cohabitation. However, there are many others. For example, we also co-evolve and cohabitate with microbes. In fact, our very survival depends on them. The majority of approximately 100 trillion cells in the human body are not human cells. 9 in 10 of the cells are from microbes that live in our body. Human microbiome consists of archaea, viruses, eukaryotes, and bacteria, but is predominantly comprised of bacteria, most of which are located in the gut. Humans have co-evolved, oh, this is a quote, humans have co-evolved with the trillions of microbes that inhabit our bodies that create complex, body habitat specific, adaptive ecosystems that are finely attuned to relentlessly changing host physiology. Dysbioses in the microbiome have been associated with numerous diseases, including inflammatory bowel disease, multiple sclerosis, diabetes types 1 and 2, allergies, asthma, autism, and cancer, end quote. When we consider who we are at a fundamental physical level, we often refer to our DNA. However, quote, nearly 10% of the human genome is made of bits of virus DNA, end quote. Additionally, it's estimated there are approximately 3,300,000 bacterial genes in the human microbiome, more than 150 times the number of human genes. Our DNA, so that which makes us distinguishable as Homo sapiens, actually shares, and we all know this, many similarities with other species. And this current pandemic demonstrates the complexities of genetic similarities between humans and other species. So coronavirus cross-species transmission was only possible because of genetic similarity. And if human exceptionality held and humans were drastically different from other species, maybe the pandemic wouldn't exist. The virus's binary view recategorizes species as suitable or unsuitable for infection and lumps species into these new categories. Just a different way of thinking about how we categorize things and think about similarity and relationship. So another way to think about how we're entwined with other species is to consider how our body composition changes over time as it incorporates bits of the environment like into us. And this is another sort of draft image that's beginning to suggest this. The food we eat becomes integrated into our cells. For example, we raise and butcher, cattle for steak, and we get the protein, it's broken down and becomes part of our own body. Same thing with like the milk and calcium coming into our bones. Where did the cows get the calcium? They got it from the grass, which got it from the soil, which got it from the rocks. So it's like this really interconnectedness. Our bodies also take in other materials from breathing in, the photosynthetic oxygen off gases from trees, I guess you could call it, or smoke particles from our wildfires, as a lot of us are right now, to our skin absorbing, water while swimming, or even like the assimilation of carbon-14 into our cells from like the atmospheric atomic bomb testing. Not us personally, but a previous generation. The sick building syndrome is an example of how our body composition is affected by our building compositions. So there's this more intimate relationship between your body and your building, where like poor indoor air quality and toxic building product off-gassing can adversely affect our health. These are just examples to say our genetic composition may be understood as a product of complex multi-species entanglements. Our physical composition may also be altered by our ongoing entanglements with the world around us. These relationships belay the fictitious binary between human and nature and the falsehood of human exceptionalism. How much of us is us? How much of us is diverse other? Are they one and the same? So now returning to the concept of monuments. Although I did not set out to make a monument to non-humans, this project can be viewed as such to help speculate about monuments. So what follows is an open and incomplete reinterpretation of the projects through the lens of remembrance. Through their processes of regeneration and replenishment, the projects continually perform acts of remembrance in service of ecosystems and their communities. The ongoing processes continually recreate the monument. If you recall from the beginning of the talk, I spoke of how understanding of artifact as a defect in an image opens up engagement with artifact as a result of process, in addition to the physical object. By definition, these artifacts are unintentional products that result from defects in the process and are not really designed. However, in this case, unintentionality is built into the design of these projects. The monument provides an overall structure whose components have great latitude for flexibility, adaptation, spontaneity, and randomness. The monument appears both unchanging as cyclic processes endlessly repeat, but always changed as no process is ever exactly the same, repetition to repetition, and indeed sometimes quite different. If the systems of the projects failed and the species went extinct, the ruins of the project would still be considered monuments, monuments to loss and lessons learned. But these monuments, as living and changing systems, can both facilitate remembrance of the past and be active participants in building a better future. So what better way to respect, honor, and remember non-human species than by supporting their survival? What would a present day monument to a dodo bird matter to the dodo bird? In true anthropocentric style, it would only matter to us. So this particular one, the grassland monument here, because of severe loss of the Chihuahuan Desert grasslands, I conceived of the grassland project as an infrastructure of grassland refugia, emergency places of safe retreat to support species survival until a future time when a climate favorable to the expansion of grasslands like returns. The idea of refugia was inspired by Pleistocene refugia, areas of species retreat in isolation during glacial expansion events. And the grassland refugia are fitting monuments, even memorials, to the massive grassland loss that has already occurred. The structure's physical presence acts as a memory prompt for a past condition. Luckily, all is not yet lost, and these structures are not only a place of loss, but also of hope and life. Paradoxically, they support greater biodiversity per unit area than the original grasslands themselves. In the way a watering hole in the desert might teem with diverse life, the grassland refugia, or should I say multi-species condensers, due to the overall scarcity of grasslands, are hyperdiverse and hyperdense grassland communities. The functional systems of the design merge with the grassland processes, and in doing so generate artifacts of remembrance. The aquatic ecosystem of the Cuatro Ciénegas Basin is comprised of marsh, spring, river, and playa habitats that feed underground aquifers, which have held continuous water and bacterial life since the Precambrian. The aquatic project helps supply water to aquifers, as well as above ground aquatic habitats to support the high biodiversity of the area. As a monument, it might be thought of as a monument to the persistence of Precambrian bacteria. The aquatic monument is not a memorial. It strives to maintain existing conditions so that a memorial, a monument to loss, is never needed. The functional systems of the design also generate artifacts of remembrance. So I'm happy to stop there, or I was going to show the actual video and then like talk through parts of it. But I see it's 7:07, so whatever you'd like to do.
Along how long do you think that video will be, Kate?
If I just play it straight through, it's without talking, it's 7 minutes, or I could pause it in different places. Someone's saying show the video. Okay.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead and show it.
Okay, sounds good. And I'll let it play then, and I won't pause it. I'll just talk over it if necessary, but that's, oh, I guess I could have, I know what I need to do, sorry. Escape this one, and then wait for my poor computer.
So as you're getting this video ready, Kate, I just want to let our attendees know that if you have any questions for Kate after her presentation, there is a Q&A section. So go ahead and please write your questions so that way, as soon as this video is done, we can answer your questions. All right.
Thanks. So this should be pretty familiar. That was just a map locating where the Cuatro Ciénegas area is located. And here's that map of this is like a composite of results of lots of research into what the species of this area are, what the fish relative percentages are in different habitats, kind of thinking about what their relationships might be, what the space might look like, as more of a diagram, like an illustrated sort of diagram, what those different habitat communities are. The interesting thing about these fish is a lot of the same species, but they're in different abundance. They occur in different places, in different habitats at different rates. So I thought that was really interesting. And this is just a lot of the elements of the design I already sort of talked about are shown in this video. It kind of scrolls past them quickly, but this is also on, and this is the video that's on display at SFAI. So you can see it there. So now we've seen this design from lots of diagrams, technical drawings, bird's eye view, isometrics, views that are only exist as a mental construct, not a visual experience. And now this is trying to understand it more from like a fish perspective. We were just in the river, and now we've just swum into the acequia. We're gonna go down the acequia and be deposited in the pool. If we go off the edge. So the interesting thing about this is if you're, it's about how different a non-human perspective might never experience the architecture or even know about the architecture the way that we do. Where the fish here is experiencing those legs, the supports that stick into the ground, and kind of they might be important to provide shoreline cover to protect them from predators. the shade elements to make it cooler or feel more secure. This wall that would have vegetation growing on it, they might want to eat or take shelter in the little nooks and crannies, that kind of thing. Over in the deeper area of the pool. Here's the visualization of, so there's the catfish on the left just hanging out. Here's this looking from the water up at the structure, and you can see sort of the shade elements, and then these the stems mixing with the water, the lily stalks, providing cover. There's Llanos, and then here's the grassland species and their relationship. So the black-tailed prairie dog is a keystone species in the grassland community, and a lot of the presence of that one species helps other species be present there. And there's lots of different like grassland communities within the larger community. So there's, you know, the arid plants and the salt tolerant plants, and then unfortunately, or this is just what's happening, a lot of the grassland is actually transitioning to desert scrub. And just like the fish had different habitats, these migratory birds, these are some of the birds that are the most dominant in this area, their habitats are also sort of segregated. And then here's the grassland design. There's the seed bank, the adobe seed bank. Wind screens that are partially eroded. We'll see there's a view of them with the earth all around them in different states of disarray, generating the grasslands. And then the wood shade structure and the vegetable garden on the inside, and the bird on the perch. And then this one is as if you were one of the migratory birds flying in. And this is an actual site near Llanos here, in the grasslands near Llanos. And it's these colors because I was trying to get a UV vision. So like blues and purples, trying to represent that. Here's the adobe seed banks walls. And now we're flying across to the cholla shade structure on the west and into the cholla skeleton nesting bundles. And then through the screen, the shade screen here, into this sort of interstitial area before we go through the water protection layer, through these perforations in the water protection layer, and see now we're getting a view of that thermally controlled space that has air insulation, and then the semi-conditioned space that's the climate extension garden with little plants growing up in the stone wall, dry stack stone wall there, underneath the metal mesh walkway, into the water catchment basin with those hangy downy thingies are representing dripping water, in case you needed a clarification on that one. And then we're gonna go underneath the walkway, and then directly in front of us and below there, you can kind of see some of the shadows is the underground cistern, but you can see only a narrow strip of water is really intended to be exposed, but it's still really shaded. And now we're going to go up into the shade structure, which would have cholla underneath it, really dense sticks of cholla. I just didn't model that. And now we're on the roof, and you can see the perches for the predatory birds. And we go over to the waffle garden inspired roof garden. And here's that interstitial space of where it's like more of an extended season in there, and then like trying to imagine from a bird's perspective, what are the things they focus on, you know, the predators, the nesting areas, etc. And that's it. So thank you very much. Hopefully it wasn't too technical.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was amazing. Your work is, you know, beyond, you know, exemplary. So it's really great work. And the fact that you take the perspectives of not only, you know, one specific, like animals in general, but different animals as well. So I really love that about your work.
Thank you.
So we have a couple questions here. So the first one that I see is, in your readings, have you heard of a story of a lighthouse keeper that realized he was seeing the last of his endangered species of birds, then decided to kill it? Trying to find this extinction story and thought of you might know about this.
No, I haven't heard about that. That's horrible. Yeah, I wonder if anyone else listening, if they might know, they could put it in the chat. But I will look for it as well. Thanks for letting me know about it.
Another question is, could you go share your thoughts on monuments to past, present, and future interspecies habitats?
Yeah, I mean, this is more like I was trying to say, it's more of a area that I'm really just started thinking about only for this presentation. So it's more of just random musings. But I was trying to think here, like, that the monument could be the process. And instead of a monument being a static entity that represents, it's like a symbol that just represents something, like a sculpture, and makes us respond, and you have to basically be human to understand that and interact with it, and understand what it stands for, maybe read a plaque or something like that. Why can't these monuments actually make the world a better place? You know, so I was thinking here that these, because, like, for example, in the grassland, the municipal water is piped in, it goes through, it's used by people and then put back into landscape. And that's that continual influx of low flow water that then creates a condition where grasslands can exist, where the rest of the surrounding areas, there's not enough precipitation anymore due to climate change. You know, that's why they're going out. So you have this constant sort of, the process itself in a way is sort of static, but then it, every seasonal cycle where the grasslands sprout again, it's almost like they are the monument. And you're going, yay, we're alive, not dead yet. So I was starting to think about it in those terms and just kind of wondering.
Another comment is, I love these perspectives. Would you include cameras in your structures so people could experience that in real time?
Interesting. You know, I hadn't thought about that at all. I think my first gut reaction would be no, because it brings me back, it makes me think of the William Cronon writings about the trouble of wilderness, and how one of the issues with wilderness is our separation to it, and how we kind of, if there's this binary between humans and nature, we value it differently and use it differently, and it can actually create problems. So it's more about how do we occupy this space together. So my idea is that they have this idea as a guest room, and there'd be like people checking in and checking out, but also non-human species like checking in and checking out. And then there's these interesting overlaps, like what happens when a mountain lion moves in, and then, you know, a family of 4 wants to come move in, or like who cleans up the space after this. And I don't have answers for any of that right now, but I think those conflicts are actually kind of the, like, interesting and kind of the point, instead of sort of separating. So instead of the cameras, I would say that people get to experience it in person, like actually be there.
Another question is, the Adobe seed bank walls remind me of Paul Stateman's work, including fungal spores in chainsaw oil and seeds and fungal spores in cardboard packaging. Can you elaborate on designing a succession?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that reference. So yeah, that's a really great question. That's actually something that I want to get into more. I was hoping maybe there'll be a future partnership or a collaboration where I could work with someone and actually mock something up, which would be pretty cool, and test things out. But the general idea is that the soil, like to use different types of soil to create like heterogeneous soil patches. And you have different physical compositions, mineral compositions, which would then support like different seed communities, like a salty, well, you wouldn't want to purposely put salt into the soil, but some plants are more salt tolerant than others, or some are like more aridity than others, or like that kind of thing. So it allows like the plants to find their own sort of niche and microclimate. And then the seeds themselves would be like native grassland seeds that are harvested and then put into the seed walls. So try that out.
Nice. From Falcon Dove, he made a comment of provokes thoughts that he never thought before. So
That's great.
I think this project is causing a lot of people to question and really think about their surroundings. So I'm glad you were able to make this project, Kate, to inspire these, thoughts from other people.
Thank you.
Looks like, oh, nope, there's another question. There are elements of your concept that reference very specific cultural practices that are essential to your design. In the monument, how do you ensure that wisdom that sits in place does not alienate from the inherent value systems that contribute to the design? Where in the monument is the human-animal cultures?
Oh man, that's an excellent question. Anonymous attendee, I want to partner with you wherever you are.
It goes very real.
Yeah, that's great. Good question. Yeah, needs to be thought through. Definitely don't want to go into appropriation, and want it to still reflect like the place and kind of tie into the cultures and the traditions and the histories. So I think it would probably end up being maybe more from a community design, like planning initiative, where you can kind of get people involved and help take ownership. And so, and maybe have some sort of co-design take place. Like this is just like the initial speculative design. This is obviously, it's not going to be built or anything like that. But that's still a great question to consider in a speculative design. Yeah, I'm wondering if you have a response to your own question and would like to type it in there and continue the conversation.
So we have a comment in the chat saying that reminds me of an old permaculture planting method of seed balls, seeds rolled into a native soils with clay and tossed into a landscape to germinate.
Yep. Yeah, our seed bombs. Yeah, totally.
So yeah. Great questions, everybody. Any final questions? Whoa. Eileen Tucker wrote a big question that she wants to get answered before we're done here. So she says, I really appreciate how your designs exist, not only as habitable space for humans and other animals, but also how their particular systems participate within and even benefit the existing natural systems. How do you consider the maintenance and operations of the building systems in terms of human on-site or off-site management? You use several passive systems in your design. Could these be entirely passive? Could these buildings be left alone? I thought of this also as you engage the topic of monuments and even ruin, which I think you've adapted your body of work towards quite fabulously.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, great question. So I think the way I've been thinking about maintenance here is not explicitly like, oh, let me think about maintenance, but I've kind of folded a few little things in here and there relating to maintenance, like for example, on the aquatic design, the east and west shade screens where they'd have like grass woven in between them to actually build up the density of that shade screen. And then that becomes nesting material for the birds for that season, or duff that then disintegrates and which is duff as habitat for the season, but then it just disintegrates and becomes fertilizer. So that would be like, that particular practice would be a seasonally recurring practice. And there would be other elements like the adobe seed bank walls themselves. After fully eroding, when do you construct more? And how then are you not just constructing it for the non-human species? Like, how is it also beneficial to the humans? And in terms of these buildings being left alone, I think maybe at times they could be left alone, but kind of related to the earlier question about cameras, I think that tension of the human and non-human occupying that space, whether it's exactly simultaneously or maybe it's like slightly staggered at times, but still within like a related time frame, is actually more interesting and challenging for sure. So I kind of like it because it's challenging and because then we have to engage with it and move forward with it. So, and the systems aren't completely passive. Like, for example, the grassland one would rely on, I mean, you could, so we'd have municipal water coming in, and that was sort of linked into toilet flushing systems and running the sinks and the showers and, you know, gray water and black water, et cetera. You could instead just like have the municipal water piped in and then go into irrigation, like drip irrigation systems. In that case, it could technically be left alone, but I think that would be kind of missing the point, even though it could sort of technically happen. Yeah.
And I guess we have a follow-up question in the question saying, don't want to go on a geek out rant in the chat. Apparently they'll follow up with you if
Yes,
that's
please
okay.
do.
I don't know if you want to share any type of contact information with anybody that wants
to
follow up.
Yeah, I guess I can put it in the chat. So this is my school email address, and that's the best way to reach me.
Okay. David, you had a question?
Yes, I'm just curious to see where you see this going in the future, and what you're working on now going forward related to this work and your research, because you had mentioned when we first started chatting about this. Anything developed since then, or where you'd like to see it go?
Yeah, so I definitely want to continue this topic and this particular project. Like, thank you to you guys and this show for helping me like inch it forward and work on the next step of it and consider other topics. Like the idea of monuments, it's something I really hadn't been thinking about, like I've said. So it's kind of pushed me and challenged in interesting ways. I think in broad terms, reading, I have, if you could see in my room right now, there's like stacks and stacks and stacks of books like everywhere that I haven't had a chance to get to. So I feel like I've just kind of scratched the surface on this, and I'm getting into deep and very complicated waters and need to learn a lot more, and also learn through writing, journal articles, but also kind of other modes of storytelling. Like I was mentioning from David Abrams' work and Kate Orff and the Elizabeth Colbert book, that kind of, or maybe even more like poetry or other sort of expressive modes. And then just using design, speculative design, like I have in this project, continuing that practice to critique and question these ideas. So like right now I'm working on a really small team project. That's a very fast-paced sort of thing where we're exploring ideas of justice for feral species. And that's been fun. But also just like meeting people and having really interesting conversations, like anonymous attendee. That'd be great as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Does anybody have any last questions or comments?
Comments? I think that looks about it.
Okay. So I'm going to close this out with reminding everyone that we have another laser talk, but we want to thank Kate so much for this talk. I mean, it's been amazing being able to work with you on this and to see kind of have these different discussions in different formats visually and getting the 3D rendering and just seeing it develop is really exciting.
Yes, Kate, thank you so much for being able to be a part of the show. You've really been a valuable person in this. So we appreciate all that you've done and, you know, can't wait to see your future work.
Yeah, great. Thank you all for having me. Thank you for the comments in the chat. And yeah, I look forward to future collaborations. Thank you guys very much.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
So I'm gonna, so I still have, sorry, I still have something to say.
Okay.
I need to mention SciArt Santa Fe that's our organization. Please follow us on Instagram at SciArt Santa Fe. We have more information about the show on sciartsantafe.org. We're also on Facebook and Twitter, and now we have our YouTube channel, so please subscribe. Our next show is the Border Studio, and this presentation will feature some of the students and the professors from the University of New Mexico School of Architecture and Planning as well. Francisco Uvina, who's the Director of Historic Preservation, and Kathy Kambick, who's a landscape architect. The Border Studio site is located between Ciudad Juarez and El Paso in a tangle of highways, ditches, no man's lands, and degraded riparian zones. This studio sought to envision a new life with deep historical connections to an area with a problematic past and difficult infrastructural realities. This studio operated in partnership with the University of Arizona and the Universidad Autónoma de Ciudad Juárez. The project includes ideas and suggestions for the rehabilitation of existing buildings on the US side, as well as the revitalization of the Rio Grande and natural landscape. It was also supported by the national parks. I'm going to add a link for tomorrow. If you have not signed up, I really encourage you to attend. I'm going to put it into the chat. And also, if we have a page of our other lasers that are happening next week with another landscape architecture studio and Chico McMurtry's robot crossing the border. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to email us. That's it. Thank you very much, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you, Kate. Thank you, David. Thank you, Andrea. And thank you, Amy. So we'll see you next time. Mm-hmm.